Additional aids and services are available to individuals with disabilities. To make such a request, please contact us by email, by clicking the Help tab in the PD portal, or at pdportal@tamu.edu, by phone, including Relay Texas at 1-800-441-7323, or in writing to Train PD, PD Portal Support, 4477 TAMU, College Station, Texas 77843. Both a transcript and accessible document of the content presented in this webinar can be found as resources in the course description. Click on the blue links under Course Resources in the description. When a link is clicked, a new browser window will open.
Welcome to Manager Monday. Topic for today is mutual respect, how to build it in your workplace. Our presenter is Dr. Rick Alvarado. My name is Wendy Christensen. I am TCOL Professional Development Specialist. I am your host today, and helping me out is Anne Marie Molinari Sanders. We'd like to welcome our presenter today, Dr. Rick Alvarado. Dr. Alvarado is the former Executive Director of Education Service Center, Region 2 in Corpus Christi. He served as an educator for 38 years and retired in August of 2020. Rick has a passion for training and has trained superintendents, board members, leadership teams, and teachers. He's done some previous presentations for us, and they're all great information. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Alvarado, and welcome.
Thank you, Wendy and Anne-Marie. Well, this session is about mutual respect. And as you all know, based on your experiences in working with people, that we know how important mutual respect is. So let's start off with this first question. Mutual respect in the workplace is critical for an organization to stay productive and efficient. Is that a true statement or a false statement? Well, it is a very true statement, because what happens is when people feel disrespected, their relationship sometimes sours, and or they don't respect the other person for what they're bringing to the organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do about that so that we don't get to that point in relationships. So here's our agenda for today. So what is mutual respect? And we're going to talk about that in the workplace, and not only in the workplace, but also in our own personal and professional relationships. And why is it important in the workplace? I think it's critically important, especially in the workplace, because it can either make or break an organization. And then we're going to talk about 7 ways to foster mutual respect in the workplace. I will guarantee you that as we talk about these 7 ways to foster this mutual respect, you're going to be thinking in your head, yes, I do that. Yes, I do that. I do that really well. Or you know what? I may do that, but maybe I need to enhance how I do that. So that's what I want you to take away from this conversation today is about, so how can you enhance what you're currently doing, create a great working environment by building mutual respect in the workplace. We're going to ask you to think about and reflect about some experiences that you've had whenever you felt disrespected or not respected in the workplace, and how that may possibly made you feel, and how in the workplace today, how that is making people feel today. So here's our overview. Based on our first question today, mutual respect in the workplace is critical for an organization to stay productive and efficient. Employees who feel that they are being respected, research says that they'll perform much better at their jobs and be happy to do that. And we all know that when people are happy about doing things, the performance of that and their level of doing the work increases. Also, showing your staff that they are valued and approved of promotes a positive work culture that increases employee engagement and promotes loyalty to your company. And this last bullet here is really critical, because I think that as leaders, it's important for us to constantly affirm our employees for what they're doing, but also in the same vein is giving them opportunities for growth when you see those opportunities for growth, because I think there needs to be a balance of that, of when employees are doing well, acknowledge that. And when they could be doing something a little bit different or better, provide those opportunities for conversations to provide your expertise in helping them grow. Because I think what happens in organizations is people thrive on opportunities, but they also thrive on feedback as well. And the more feedback they get, the better employees they will become. So workplace communication, disagreements are bound to happen from time to time among team members and even leaders between employers and employees. And so one of the things that we have to be cognizant about is, what process do we have in place to handle disagreements? Or is there a platform or a forum for employees to voice a concern that they may have? either with another employee or with the processes that we have in the system to help us operate efficiently. If you implement a culture of respect in your organization, then those disagreements will be dealt with using the right workplace communication techniques. However, it's also important that employees understand and know what those workplace communication techniques are so that they can utilize them. But if you don't, you risk turning your workplace into a battlefield, decreasing overall productivity and efficiency, because what happens is people tend to take sides. And we all know that as leaders, we can't tell other employees our version of the story, but the employee sometimes or most often tells their version of the story. And so it's really important that we be clear about those things so that everyone focuses on the work and not on what I call the stuff that happens in workplaces. So here's a question for you to reflect on. What does mutual respect look like or sound like in your organization?
For me, I don't get the mutual respect because everyone treats me like I'm the new kid on the block in that particular program. And they've let me know if I voice my concern or things that are different. Well, I've been doing it this way. I've been doing it that way. So basically, what your opinion doesn't matter. We know everything. You're just here to do what we're telling you to do. And I don't have a voice or opinion. So I don't feel like I'm part of the team. I just feel like an outsider.
And I'm so sorry you're experiencing that because the organization may be missing some great opportunities based on your experience and with the value you bring to the organization. And so I think it's mindful of all of us as leaders is how are we helping our employees to feel valued? Because when they feel valued, they'll move mountains for us. But when they don't feel that, when they feel devalued, they won't move those mountains for us. So what is mutual respect? Respect is about caring about someone's feelings, opinions, and wishes. When people's feelings, opinions, and wishes are not respected, then they disengage. And I'm not sure that that's the kind of employees that we want in our organizations, disengaged employees, because then we don't get the best out of them. And so it's important that we as leaders make sure that we respect the feelings, opinions, and wishes. Now, it's important when you read this slide, it says respect is caring about someone. It doesn't mean agreeing with someone, because there's a difference when we agree with someone and when we care about someone's feelings, opinions, and wishes. Because I can think of many times when I disagreed or I had a different perspective with some of the opinions that some people had, but I still respected them for having the courage to bring that perspective to the table, because that's so important. That's how we grow as organizations. It can also include admiring their qualities, skills, and achievements. I can think back now on when I was in team meetings with my leadership team. There was certain qualities and skills that some of my team members or all of my team members had something that I said, I wish I could be more like them and do that as efficiently and skillfully as they do it. And so every time, I believe in the power of reflection. So every time after meetings, I would go back and write. I'm a writer, I'm a journaler. So I would go back and write those things down so that I could begin to reflect on how could I be more like them in those particular activities. So I encourage you to do the same. It's more than simply tolerating someone who is different from you, because that makes it for a really awkward work environment. And we don't ever want to tolerate someone. We really have to find the root cause of why we are in such a disagreement about everything or most things, because it can be because they were disrespected or you felt disrespected, and therefore you get this sense of tolerating someone. It also means that we treat people with courtesy and trying to understand their worldview and significance. In today's world, we have people who are from all over the place and have different experiences, and so it's important that we acknowledge those. And then, because a lot of times what happens is we can learn from them if we are open to that possibility. What I like about what y'all do in this organizations that y'all lead and y'all have is that you have these meetings and y'all can have opportunities to learn from each other. How are you doing recruitment in your area? And then maybe adapt whatever they're doing to your organization to see if it works for you. I know when I was at Region 2 and we had our adult ed program, it was important for us and for our leaders to go, and what I would say is observe others and ask questions and during state meetings about what's working for you and what's not working for you, so that we don't fall into the same traps with what's not working for us, but definitely come back and talk about what's working for them and see how we can have maybe some of those strategies and techniques implemented in our program. So mutual respect is the idea that all human beings are valued. And the person who shared earlier, it's obvious that you're not feeling valued in your organization. So as leaders, it's important that we make an effort to make sure that everyone that we are responsible for feels valued in that organization, because it'll just change their mindset about how they come to work, how they do their work, and how they react to our customers. So why is mutual respect important in the workplace? Mutual respect is vital to a healthy company culture, especially in our globalized world. People don't want to come to an environment that's toxic. It's just not a great place to be. So we want to make sure that we create an environment that the culture represents the values and morals that we want in that organization. And so because of COVID, we had a lot of people go remote. And even in today's organizations, we still have people that are working remotely. So we somehow lose that personal touch or the face-to-face interactions. However, in the programs that you all lead, your teachers deal with people in a face-to-face environment. So as teachers, how are they engaging our students and making sure that each of them feel valued every time they come to our classes? And it's also crucial for coworkers to treat each other, as someone said earlier, with respect. In our workplaces, we spend a whole lot of time with the people that we work with, sometimes more time with them in our active world than we do when we go home, because when we go home, we have other responsibilities and then we go to sleep. It's really about how do we model that respect for each other. Building respect among your staff has several benefits for your organization. I touched upon a couple of them, but I can only imagine that you all can think of many ways of how building respect in your organization has brought great benefit to your organization. So as we talked earlier, it promotes productivity and cooperation. Employees who work in an environment where mutual respect is the norm are more productive and cooperative, which improves team performance. I'll give you an example. When I was a principal and I was supervising teachers, at that particular time in the Texas Education Agency created a teacher evaluation that people would receive EQs. What tended to happen initially was that teachers stopped sharing as readily as they used to because they wanted to get more EQs than maybe their teacher down the hall. It was kind of disruptive until people quickly realized that the score was not how many EQs you received and how many less EQs the other person received, because in totality at the end, it's about how well are our students progressing in our school environment based on what we as teachers are performing for them. And I think that's what this speaks to, is that when we make a competitive environment of respect and how people get affirmed in our organization, then we lose that cooperation between staff and sometimes the sharing of ideas. It improves efficiency and reduces stress. I can imagine that the person who spoke earlier, the stress that you're under having to go to work in that kind of environment. And so it's really about, as leaders, the well-being of all of our employees should be very crucial so that they are respected for what they do and what they bring. And it's important for them to feel that. Workers who feel respected are less stressed and more motivated to make the most of their skills and traits. So they're willing to go the extra mile on behalf of the organization when they feel respected and affirmed. But it's also conversely the opposite when they don't feel those things. What we want people is to come to work to enjoy coming to work and enjoy being with people that they work with, because that makes for a productive environment. Your organization will prosper when your employees are working at their best, but your organization does not prosper when employees are checking a box, coming in every day, but that's all they're doing is coming in because they don't feel respected or valued for what they bring to the organization. It also increases satisfaction and engagement from your employees. Being respected in the workplace raises employee satisfaction, which can increase engagement and reduce employee turnover. We know how important it is to maintain our good staff that we have, because when we have to retrain, go through the interview process and retrain, that sets us back a little bit in our organization. And what we know about our students, based on my experience when I was at the service center, was that our students connected with our teachers. And when the teachers left, there was this void, and it took time for them to rebuild that trust and that confidence back in the people that were teaching them. I really like the study because according to the Harvard Business Study Review, they stated that treating others with respect is the most important leadership behavior when it comes to employee commitment and engagement. And this speaks to leaders at all levels. At all levels, how are leaders acting and reacting to the employees that they supervise? Do they treat them with dignity and respect? Or when they go to staff meetings, is it about telling the employees all the things they're not doing correctly? Or is it about highlighting those things that are going really well, but also spending some time on what are the opportunities for the organization based on what we're doing that maybe is not as effective or efficient? How can we have conversations in a meaningful way, in a trusting way, in a mutual respect way, to help us think differently about how we do corrective actions in our organization? So here's a reflection. Think of a time when you were not respected in the workplace. What did it feel like for you as the employee or the coworker?
When I felt disrespected in the workplace is when I wasn't being heard. And we bring a wealth of information from our background. And it doesn't mean that we can't contribute, but sometimes individuals get stuck in a groove because they may have been there longer and that things work best for what have been taking place. But it's not to say that you can't entertain new ideas, not so much as reinventing the wheel, but to improve on it.
I call that the yeah, but syndrome. When someone provides a new idea, perspective on the table, and the leader who's leading the meeting says, yeah, but when we did that 10 years ago, it didn't work. And I remind folks that 10 years ago was a different time and space. So you had different people sitting around this table. Today, you have different people that have a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge, that if we allow ourselves to not get caught up in that yeah, but syndrome, imagine how our organizations can flourish if we give credit, especially if our employees feel value for bringing ideas to the table, because no one wants to bring an idea to the table and get shut down because they won't ever do it again. The likelihood of them doing it again is very likely. So it's really about how the leader reacts to that is going to be all telling at what happens in future meetings. So lack of mutual respect. The lack of mutual respect can lead to disruptive behavior. Sometimes what happens is when people aren't valued, they begin to show some nuances of things that maybe they wouldn't exhibit if they felt valued. And sometimes what happens is the second bullet, and we never want these kinds of things that are on the second bullet to be taking place in our organization because that's very disruptive to our organization. And it can actually take control of the organization if we do nothing about it. We want to have a harmonious relationship, that people are cooperative and respectful of each other. However, it takes work. It just doesn't happen because we allow it to. And when we choose as leaders to not address some of these things head on, then we're allowing some of those behaviors to happen because we're also choosing not to address it. An employee who doesn't feel respected might even be unwilling to go to work and do their job. So they may start experiencing a lot of absenteeism or a lot of other kinds of experiences that are not productive for the organization, because then you have other people in the organization who begin to say, well, why am I working so hard? I should be doing that exact same thing. So it's really about how do we as leaders avoid those kinds of experiences. When communication doesn't happen as it should, one of the things is because maybe the communication in the organization is non-existent, or it's poor communication. And so we have to make sure that we have effective communication when we're leading with folks. And I like to practice with people that I trust the most, especially when it's something really important. I want to practice that conversation with them before I have that conversation with staff, especially if it's a difficult conversation, such as maybe we're not meeting the expectations of the state based on the numbers that we currently have, or maybe that we have to downsize because we've lost some funding, or whatever that may be. It's really about being really purposeful and mindful in my own headspace about how I'm going to relay that information, because I know what my intent of the message is, but what's important is how is the receiver receiving that message, and what are they walking away is the more important piece of that conversation and communication. So that's why it's important for me to use my words and my language, whatever I'm choosing to say, to make sure that that's the intended. And then before people walk away from that meeting is checking for understanding. When I said this, what do you think that meant? And having people respond to that, because then you can get a good idea of whether your intention of the message was hit right on, or you have to go back and maybe clarify some things because you did not communicate as effectively as you thought you may have. So here are the 7 ways to foster mutual respect in the workplace. As organizations, it's your job to foster respect in the workplace. You have to model that. Are you showing up to work every day being the best version of yourself? Or are there some days where maybe you don't feel well, or maybe something happened that's causing you to be stressed about something, and therefore you're not showing up as the best version of yourself? Because I think it's important that when we walk in those doors every single day, regardless of what's happening in my life or in my experience or my environment, that I am showing up to the employees that I lead with the best version of myself. Because when you do that, then they begin to do the same thing. They begin to say things like, you know what, he or she is always so happy. How do they do that? I want to be more like that. And that's what you want in organizations, is how can we have a harmonious relationship with others? And then can we achieve this by using the following 7 methods? I say yes, but I'll leave that up to you. It is important to ensure that everyone adheres to these rules, from first line employees to top management. When I was in an organization, my boss, which was the leader of the organization, he was not very relational with people. When we went to meetings, it was always about what we were doing wrong. And so after a while, what happens is people dreaded going to those meetings because it was always about how we were doing things wrong or how the organization was not functioning the way it was supposed to. But he never modeled for us about positive affirmation. So we had to take it upon ourselves. Is that the way I want to lead? And if it is, then I keep doing those things. But most of us would say that's not how we want to lead. We had to begin to work with each other to help us be the best version of ourselves. So here are the 7 strategies, and you all do all of these very effectively. But as we talk about these 7, what I want you to think about is, how can I be more effective at doing that, whatever that is for you? And so, because I think that's how we grow as leaders, and that's how we get better at leading. This first one is leading by example. You see the 7 of them there. So let's go to the first one. So lead by example. Great leaders set a positive example for all employees by being the first to show respect to their colleagues, even when they're being disrespected by their colleagues. And that is hard sometimes for some people. You have to maintain that decorum of not getting flustered when the other person is flustered. You have to maintain that respect and that language and the body language, the verbal language, to continue to show that even though you're disrespecting me, I'm not going to go there, because that's not where this organization is about. We respect each other. And then, of course, you have to have a conversation with them offline after the meeting about, is that the way that we relate to each other when we disagree about something? It's okay to disagree, but we have to be mindful and respectful about how we disagree. So this begins with showing kindness and using appropriate language when communicating with employees. Small gestures like this, they don't go unnoticed. Your employees will notice when you give them the positive affirmations, or when you say thank you, or just that smile that you give them, or the thumbs up, or however it is that you show your staff appreciation. It's those things that help them go to the next project and the next project with a lot of excitement. If your organization's leaders practice respectful behavior, your staff will mirror it. But conversely, if you don't practice respectful leadership or behavior, your employees will do the exact same. And I've seen that in organizations where leaders are very respectful of their employees, and the entire organization has this sense of belonging, this sense of we want to be. Yeah, we disagree, but we disagree respectfully. We have conversations about it. We don't stay mad at each other. How are you leading by example? And then what evidence do you have to support it? So maybe one thing that for us to consider is, think of when you've been maybe where you felt maybe disrespected about something or someone, from someone, or maybe your idea, your opinion, your perspective was challenged. those are the best opportunities for us to practice our emotional response, because sometimes what happens is we allow our emotional response get the better of us. I think practice all the time. And that's why I believe in the reflective practice as practitioners. It's about what can we learn from that experience? What do I have to do differently in a similar environment? And what is the outcome that I want that's different from the outcome that I had this first time? And I think that's how we grow as leaders. And yeah, and so your evidence would be, for example, me, I journal. And so I write back so that when I go back and say, you know what, I want to reflect on when I'm being challenged from my perspective, how am I reacting to that? That's my perspective only, right? But I also want to make sure that my own perspective is in alignment with what other people are seeing. So sometimes I will ask another person that was at the meeting to give me their feedback, their honest feedback. When we were having that discussion, what was my body language saying? And what was my verbal language saying? And was it a match? Because sometimes what happens is they're not. Two is actively listen to employees. As leaders, it's imperative that we listen actively, not passively, or not trying to respond to whatever they're saying, but truly listen actively to what it is that they're saying. And the way I like to gauge that is when I'm having a conversation with someone, is rephrase or paraphrase what they've just asked me to make sure that I've heard them. And a lot of times I'll hear people say, exactly, yes, that's exactly what I said. Or, no, that's not what I said. What I said was, and that allows them an opportunity to clarify. So it gives me time to clarify and reframe my response for that. So the ability to actively listen to another person and understand what they are saying is a vital part of fostering mutual respect. And here again, I want to underscore, it says to understand, not to agree, but to understand them from their perspective. Hearing your employees out means sitting down with them and focusing on what they're telling you, not on what you want to hear, but what are they telling you about the organization? Because they may be giving you some vital feedback that if we took the time to listen and acted upon that, our organization would be better for that. Don't interrupt them or brush off their ideas. Rather, try to see their point of view and acknowledge what they have to say. So a lot of times what happens is, in an organization, I see this often, we interrupt each other as people are talking. We don't allow people to maybe finish their thought or their sentence. And so it's really being mindful of setting the stage where we're having meetings. It's a ground rule for us. We allow people to fully express whatever their opinion or perspective is without interruption. And you will notice that the dialogue increases because people then feel valued for that. Listening to your team members on a daily basis signals to them that you're showing them respect. And what I like to do when I was leading an organization, I would go to people and say, you know what, if you were the leader for the day, or if you were in my role, how would you handle this? And I was really doing it sincerely because I wanted a different perspective. I really wanted to know what their thoughts were. As a byproduct of that, what I found was that people felt valued for me as their leader, asking them their opinion, their perspective about what they did. That's an important piece of having people feel mutually respected, because when you ask a colleague for their perspective, that's signaling to them that you value them for what they bring to the table. Show appreciation and celebrate employees' achievement. Always try to affirm and value each team member, especially when they have gone above and beyond in completing their tasks. Because what I know about good people or up people is that they go from one task to the next task to the next task. And sometimes we don't stop to pause and celebrate all the wonderful things that happen at each phase of those tasks. And that's important for us to do as leaders. Nurturing a feeling of appreciation will make employees feel like the work they do is very worthwhile. What you will notice is over time, they will stretch themselves and stretch the organization because they know that you're appreciative of what they're doing and what they're bringing to the table. You ensure that you praise team members' contributions in front of others and reward them appropriately. I want to have a caveat to this one, because what you don't want to do is you never want to embarrass your employees in front of others by affirming what they've done or acknowledging what they've done. What I made a point to do was to get to know my employees was say, okay, so when I want to show you appreciation, how would you like for me to do that? And some would be puzzled at first. They're like, what do you mean? Well, let's say you've done a great job on project Y, and I want to acknowledge you for that. How would you like for me to acknowledge you that? And sometimes I would hear people say, well, in team meetings, I'd love for you to acknowledge that my efforts for that. But most often people would say, just tell me personally, you and I, one-on-one, or send me a note or an email, because I value that more than being in front of a group of people and being singled out or called out for that, because I'm more embarrassed of that, and that helps me to be getting better at that. And so, praise them however they like to be praised. Avoid unconstructive criticism. Nobody likes to listen to negative criticism. Yeah, are there opportunities for growth? Absolutely. There's always opportunities for growth for all of us. When you are unhappy with someone's work or behavior, try to say something positive about their performance before explaining their shortcomings. I've been in meetings supervising supervisors, and they started a meeting off with how things are not working the way they should be working and how reports are not done the way they should be done. That's, in my perspective, not a great way to start a meeting, because you start off on a negative note. I always like to start off meetings on a positive note, whether they be in group meetings or individual meetings. Tell me something that's going really well in your life right now. And a lot of times what happens is that's when I learn about, well, my son or my daughter, or something happened that's really exciting for them. So you get to know a little bit about them. And then you talk about, okay, so how I like to transition is based on what they tell me, I try to connect it. How can you make this situation? Yesterday, when you were meeting with that staff member, and that staff member was, being a little adamant about their perspective, and it was different from yours. How do you think you reacted to that? Helping them think differently about that perspective, as opposed to telling them things like, how you reacted to them yesterday in that meeting was terrible. You need to correct that. Then what happens is people get defensive about that. Can you explain exactly what you want them to do and why it is important for you to do it that way? And all too often, what I have found is when you tell people, what, I know you like to do it this way, but when we submit our reports, they have to be in this format. And that's why it's so important for the reports that you submit to be in this format, because it avoids us having to recreate or reconstruct that work that you submitted. And when an employee understands why they should complete a task in a certain way, they're much more willing to change their approach, because they see the value and the reasoning why, as opposed to maybe the boss saying, because that's the way I want it. Get to know your employees. Everyone is unique. Showing respect to your team members does not always mean treating them exactly the same way. The example I gave earlier about how do you want to be affirmed is a great way to learn that. Make an effort to learn more about each of them personally and professionally. And what I have found was when I would walk around in the hallways, I would try to retain information about, if they told me last week that they were going to have a birthday celebration for their daughter or their granddaughter in the weekend, I would make it a point to go that week and say, so how was the celebration? Because it tells them that what they're telling me is important, and I'm registering that information. Once you understand them better, it will be easier to put their actions, behaviors, strengths, and weaknesses in context. You'll have a better understanding of when someone is not on their A game. You'll have a better understanding that maybe you need to go and visit them and ask about some things to make sure that they're okay. Getting to know their hopes, their dreams, aspirations, and ambitions will enable you to achieve mutual respect in the workplace. And this is a great opportunity as you walk where your people work, is about what do they want to do? Do they want to stay in that position? So what strategies are you currently using to get to know your employees?
Like you, I try to engage my colleagues and employees on what's important to them. And like you said, circle back around and try to find out was that something they fulfilled or something like that. Also to keep in mind goals for them, because sometimes you can come across something that they may be interested in so that you can pass it on to them. Or maybe another employee in another part of the company might have same interests, and then you can have them meet one another or have them form a friendship or something around common interests. And also in observing them from afar, their mannerism, and just taking little notes about how they are personally.
Great examples. One that I truly loved is making the connection between what you're learning about them and goal setting, because I have found that when employees have to do their goals, they struggle with that. And this is a great opportunity for you to say things like, remember when we had the conversation about B? You said you want to do these things. How about making that a goal for yourself to make that a reality for you? So it's really making the connections about what we're learning about people, provide opportunities for growth. We have a lot of millennials in our working environment, and we all know that Sometimes their approach to work is different from maybe someone like me who grew up in an earlier time. And so sometimes we struggle with that, but we have to be mindful of what makes them work at their optimum level. And whenever possible, give employees a chance to upskill or take on new projects to give them a sense of purpose, especially when we know about, they really are interested in learning more about the business side of our organization, perhaps, as an example. How do we provide them those opportunities in a meaningful way, not just for another task, but in a meaningful way? This makes employees more likely to take ownership of their duties than simply doling out tasks. As a leader, giving your employees opportunities to grow and learn shows you care about them, investing in their learning and development. Because what I have found in the organizations that I've led is that people do a wonderful job of what they do, but they also want to grow and extend their learning, or perhaps maybe other opportunities within our organization or maybe in other organizations as well. But I truly believe that as leaders, our main responsibility is to grow other leaders. And what better way to do this than to provide them with opportunities? Encourage colleagues to voice their opinions and ideas, especially when they're different from the mainstream. You need to signal to your team members that you are there for them, no matter how big or small their problems or challenges are. They know that as their leader, they can come to you or talk through or process whatever it is that they have on their mind. Nothing upholds a culture of mutual respect better than an open door policy. I think, we all say we have an open door policy, but when they come to us, do we always say, not now, you can get back tomorrow, or I'm really busy right now? I know we have to say that sometimes, but if we're doing that all the time, what message are we sending them? Is it really an open door policy? I don't know. So, create a great working environment by building mutual respect in the workplace. And so these are some of the things for your consideration. The tips that we discussed can nurture a culture of respect that encourages open communication and acknowledges every employee's opinions and ideas so that everyone walks away every day feeling valued for their accomplishments during that day. And I know we can't tell every employee or give every employee a positive affirmation every day, but we should make it a practice to be mindful to make sure we're giving positive affirmations on a regular basis. Remember that the key part of showing respect for your colleagues is investing in their skills and knowledge and helping them grow as leaders. But I really want you to think about this reflection on your own. How might these strategies help you as you continue to foster mutual respect in your workplace? What things could you continue doing? What things will you enhance? And what new things will you take on based on our conversation today? And this is a reference that I used. Thank you all. Wish you all the best.
Thank you for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded webinar. After you have passed the final test with a score of 80% or greater and have received your certificate of completion, please take a few moments to complete the course evaluation. Participant feedback helps Train PD at TCAL continue to provide high-quality professional development. To leave a course feedback, please go to the completed portion of your transcript. To do this, hover over the My Learning tab and select View Your Transcript. Click on the drop-down arrow next to the word Active and select Completed. Then, click Evaluate in the drop-down menu next to the course you just completed. Please note that your feedback is greatly appreciated.